Few people know more about the depth and complexity of America's national security than Robert Gates, who spent nearly 3 decades at the CIA and National Security Council before running the Pentagon under Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Given the end of the war in Afghanistan, tensions with China, and deep divisions in this country, we thought it'd be worth hearing from the only Secretary of Defense to serve under presidents from different parties. Gates is 78 and lives in Washington State, where he says he moved to get as far away from Washington, D.C. as possible. He told us watching the chaos of the American withdrawal from Afghanistan on television made him feel sick.
The story will continue in a moment.
It was really tough. For a few days there, I actually wasn't feeling very well. And I realized it was because of what was happening in Kabul, and I was just so low about the way it had ended, if you will. And I guess the other feeling that I had was that it probably did not need to have turned out that way.
Well, President Biden said any withdrawal is messy.
Certainly the military considers the withdrawal the most dangerous part of an operation, but they really had a lot of time to plan, beginning with the deal that President Trump cut with the Taliban. So that was in February of 2020.
Robert Gates, who oversaw the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan from 2006 to 2011, told us President Trump failed to plan properly for the evacuation of Afghans who'd helped the U.S. fight the Taliban. And Gates also believes President Biden didn't act quickly enough after announcing in April he was pushing back President Trump's deadline for the U.S. withdrawal by 4 months.
It's time for American troops to come home.
Once President Biden reaffirmed that there was going to be a firm deadline date, that's the point at which I think they should have begun bringing those people out. You'd have to be pretty naive not to assume things were going to go downhill once that withdrawal was complete.
So the former president and President Biden both share some responsibility in this.
Absolutely.
As for the collapse of the Afghan government and security forces, Gates believes he and others before him made critical mistakes in how the U.S. built and trained the Afghan military.
I bear some responsibility for this. It had started before I got there, but I think that we created an Afghan military in our own image, and one that required a lot more sophisticated logistics and maintenance and support than, say, the Taliban.
The Taliban didn't have years of training from foreign advisors. They didn't know how to read. We were teaching Afghan troops how to read before anything else.
Well, they needed to know how to read in order to operate the equipment we were giving them. Instead of being light and tactical and basically self-resourced, as the Taliban were, we created a logistics-heavy, sophisticated equipment-heavy military. And when you pulled that rug out from under them, and you add on top of that the corruption of the senior military leaders and so on, it's not a surprise to me that the Afghan army collapsed.
We will maintain the fight against terrorism in Afghanistan.
President Biden has given assurances that the U.S. can still target terrorists in Afghanistan.
We have what's called over-the-horizon capabilities, which means we can strike terrorists and targets without American boots on the ground, or very few if needed.
But Robert Gates is skeptical.
The military refers to it as over the rainbow.
Because it's a fantasy.
But this notion that you can carry out effective counterterrorism in Afghanistan from a great distance, it's not a fantasy, but it's just very, very hard.
As evidenced by the botched drone strike in Kabul in the final days of the withdrawal, the U.S. military claimed they'd killed an ISIS terrorist and turned out to be an Afghan aid worker and 7 children.
If you don't have the kind of sources on the ground to have kind of real-time intelligence that allows you to target people, it's very complicated.
If they can't get that right a few blocks from the Kabul airport, how are you going to get something right over the horizon?
Exactly.
When he was Secretary of Defense, Gates would write personal condolence letters to the families of fallen service members. We wondered what he would say to them now and to all who fought in Afghanistan.
I would say that you accomplished your mission. There has not been a terrorist attack, a successful foreign-based terrorist attack on the United States since we went into Afghanistan in 2001. What happens now that we're gone remains to be seen.
Before becoming Secretary of Defense, Gates spent nearly 27 years at the National Security Council and the CIA, which he ran under President George H.W. Bush. Gates and President Biden have crossed paths for decades, as he wrote about in 2014. You wrote Joe Biden was a man of integrity. Still, I think he's been wrong on nearly every major foreign policy and national security issue over the past 4 decades.
I think he's gotten a lot wrong.
You're talking all through the years as vice president.
He opposed every one of Ronald Reagan's military programs to contest the Soviet Union. He opposed the first Gulf War. That list goes on. Now, I will say that in the Obama administration, he and I obviously had significant differences over Afghanistan, but he and I did agree in our opposition to the intervention in Libya, and frankly on issues relating to Russia and China.
But you think he made a mistake in Afghanistan in the way he handled the withdrawal?
Yes.
Do you think he believes he made a mistake?
I've worked for 8 presidents, Anderson. I've never encountered a single one of them whoever said, well, I really blew that one.
Really? Is that really true?
Never. They just don't do that. You know, deep in their heart, they may know it, but they will never say it.
Do you think it would be better if they did?
Yes. I think it would make them more credible.
What's happened in Afghanistan has been devastating for President Biden domestically. Can Biden recover?
Oh, I think so. I think that the submarine deal between the United States, the United Kingdom, and Australia, I think is a great strategic move. It sends a powerful message all around the world.
To China.
All around the world, including to China, that the United States still has a lot of arrows in the quiver, and that we will remain a force to be reckoned with in the Western Pacific.
That deal to help Australia deploy nuclear-powered submarines comes as China is increasingly threatening Taiwan. If China moves on Taiwan, is that a field that the U.S. would fight on?
There are two strategies that we need to focus on. One is deterrence, strengthening our own military presence in the region. And the second piece of the strategy is to strengthen Taiwan's ability to defend itself.
Internationally, Gates sees China as the preeminent military and economic threat to the United States.
I think this is a place where President Trump got it right. He basically awakened Americans, and I would say especially the business community, to China that the assumptions about which we had gotten wrong. And the assumption for 40 years was that a richer China would be a freer China. And that's clearly not going to happen. But there's another piece of this puzzle with China, and that is the economic side. Chinese now manage something like 36 major ports around the world. They are the biggest trading partner of more than half of South America. They are everywhere. And what are we doing in these non-military arenas to compete with the Chinese?
Robert Gates has always considered himself a Republican, but while he agreed with some of President Trump's policies, he remains highly critical of the former president. Do you think the former president will run again, President Trump?
I hope not.
Why do you hope not?
I'm a strong believer in institutions, whether it's the intelligence community, the Defense Department, the State Department, the Justice Department, the FBI. He disdains institutions, and I think he did a lot to weaken institutions.
You called him a thin-skinned, temperamental, shoot-from-the-hip and lip, uninformed commander-in-chief. Too great a risk for America, you said.
I would not edit that at all.
What do you think the greatest threat to democracy is in this country right now?
The extreme polarization that we're seeing. The greatest threat is found within the 2 square miles that encompass the White House and the Capitol building.
When you watched the insurrection on the Capitol, what did you think?
The attack on the Capitol was the first time armed enemies of democracy had been in the Capitol since the War of 1812. I mean, seeing somebody parading through the Capitol carrying a Confederate flag, that never happened during the Civil War.
What's worse, the event itself, or even now, all these months later, to have members of Congress trying to rewrite its history?
I don't understand such a denial. And these same people who were terrified on January 6th and whose lives were in danger to now basically say, well, these are just your normal tourists. The whole of our society seems to be becoming unhinged. And I've never seen so much hatred.
The continued propagation of former President Trump's big lie about the election, how big of a national security threat is that for future elections?
It seems to me that it underscores the theme that China is sounding around the world, that the United States political system doesn't work and that the United States is a declining power.
Robert Gates doesn't believe America's power is declining, but after serving under 8 presidents and seeing up close what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, he's come to accept the limits of America's military might.
You said one of the enduring lessons of the Cold War and the demise of the Soviet Union is that lasting change in a country will come only from within. I find that to be an extraordinary statement from somebody who ran military interventions in countries. You're saying that in the end, from the outside, you cannot change a country.
I believe that. And I think that, there are a handful of exceptions. Germany and Japan after World War II are examples. But we had essentially destroyed both countries. Total defeat.
Foreign policy at the end of a rifle doesn't work.
One of my favorite quotes is from Churchill. Democracy is not a harlot to be picked up in the street at the point of a Tommy gun. And I totally believe that.
I'm not sure he could get away with saying that today.
I don't think anybody ever accused him of being politically correct.
That's for sure. Is there a Gates doctrine?
I'm very much a believer in the importance of military power and in the United States having predominant military power. I also am firmly convinced that the use of the military should be the very last resort in dealing with any international situation, because no matter why and how it starts, no one can predict what will happen.
Robert Gates on the future of Afghanistan.
I think that the Taliban are likely to get a fair amount of assistance from China.
At 60minutesovertime.com.